Hello, friends. I'm Andrea Morris, and welcome to another episode of Spill the Wine, the podcast that's all about wine and debunking the myths like wine has to be expensive in order to be enjoyable, and also that you have to know a lot about wine. However, the more you listen to this podcast, you will know more and more about wine, and you'll also know about some really fantastic wineries that you may have never heard of, like the one we are visiting today, 16 Mile Cellar. And I'd like to say hello to Morgan, who's the winemaker.
Woohoo!
Woohoo! Hi, Morgan.
Hi.
Thanks for being here today.
Yeah, I'm really happy you guys wanted to invite me and come here. It's awesome.
Well, I've always enjoyed my visits to your winery, and I was blown away by your Chardonnay. So I'm really excited that we're going to get to taste that today. And I'm also really, really interested to share your story to our listeners, particularly like it's such a small winery. But when did it first get started?
Yeah, so Susan and Joe, the owners, they bought the property in 2011. And at the time, this was one of the oldest table grape properties in Niagara. So there was Concords, Duchenac, a whole bunch of old school, table grape varieties. They bought it and they replanted most. They left a block of Concords. And up until 2 years ago, we actually still had that block. It was one of the oldest Concord blocks in Niagara. But they replanted Pinot Noir and Chardonnay and Gamay over 6 years. But they also, built the winery and the house and the barn. So it was a slow kind of project that evolved from 2011. And then they didn't get their retail license here until 2016. So it was kind of like a slow evolution of becoming just a property with just grapes to becoming, a small winery and with its own functioning vineyard. So the whole idea of this project, we're in the Creek Shores sub-appellation, which is in the Niagara Escarpment area. The idea is to produce wine only made from fruit from our farm, creating a Creek Shores Chardonnay, Creek Shores Pinot Noir, Creek Shores Gamay, so we can really find out our expression of this unique little spot. And we're called 16 Mile Cellar because the 16 Mile Creek, which is 16 miles from Niagara Falls, the small creek at 16 Mile Creek, not the 16 Mile Creek in Oakville. That's often something people get confused by. But in the peninsula, a lot of people don't know these creeks, like 12 Mile Creek, 14 Mile Creek. It's all miles from the falls.
Oh.
So right now we're 16 miles from Niagara Falls, and the 16 Mile Creek is just on the other side of the property. Then we have a small creek, a sub-creek from that creek that meanders through our property diagonally. So there's the tree line that kind of separates our Pinot Noir block, the original Pinot block, and our Chardonnay, our main Chardonnay block. And that's where the creek kind of meanders through the whole property. So yeah, that's kind of the story behind the name, which I think is really important at first because everybody's like, why 16 Mile? So yeah, and then I came here in 2017. Been here since.
And is this your first gig as a winemaker, or had you been a winemaker at other places previously?
Yeah, so I've been in the industry since 2012. I did the Niagara College program, and then I worked at TAWS, and I kind of immediately started specializing in organic and biodynamic agriculture, wine growing, and winemaking. And then from there, I had a few opportunities where I went overseas. I lived in Australia for 3 years, working under David Lowe. He's kind of like a biodynamic pioneer in Australia. And I helped basically create an in-house biodynamic program where all the preps were done in-house with, all of our own biodynamic gardens that created all the preparations, going into the work back into the soil and all the sprays. Biodynamics essentially is like organics on crack, for a way to describe it. It's taking organics, which gives you a box that you paint yourself into. We have to stay within this box. Know this, know that, know this, know that. Biodynamics is like an add-on on top of that helps bring in positive and yes. So it's, no pesticides, fungicides, or herbicides for organics. And then biodynamics is going, okay, let's look at this at a broader scale where we're taking soil health, the lunar calendar, and also looking at our farm as its own entity. So creating things on the property that allow a rhythm that work with the rhythms in nature and really focusing on soil health, which in Australia, soil health is like really important. So I went there, learned an incredible amount in 3 years. And then from there, I was also his assistant winemaker on top of the biodynamic farm manager. And then from there, I got an opportunity to work in Alsace, France. And I was there 2 different wineries for 2 years. I worked for Domaine Christian Binier. You can find his wines at some bottle shops in Ontario now. And I worked for Domaine Léon Bush, which his wines are mostly sold within France. You won't see them exported. And both were natural winemakers, biodynamic wineries as well, small family-run wineries, which has kind of always been a focus of mine. I've only ever worked for small family-run wineries and made wines in small-scale environments.
Do you find that gives you more freedom as a winemaker?
Yeah, definitely in many ways, from like more freedom as to, having less risk when you want to take risks, right? So smaller batches. So if you want to try something new, start a pied de couve in the vineyard, do a wild ferment, or, not add sulfur to a batch and try to make a natural wine rather than having a 5,000 liter batch or a 10,000 liter batch, you're dealing with 1,000 liters. So the risk is that it's a little easier on the winemaker, taking less risk with smaller volumes. But also with smaller batches, you can take one block of fruit. So Pinot Noir, for example, we've got a 5-acre block, and we've got 4 different clones. Well, when we're small batch driven, we can separate, we can do 5 different picks at 5 different times, different ripeness levels, different, balances of sugar and acidity, and experiment with kind of the different clones. And so it gives you more playful freedom in that sense, definitely. And then also with like managing your tank and your barrel space too. It's a lot different when your barrel cellar only has 50 to 75 barrels versus a barrel room with thousands of barrels. It also allows me to be like more hands-on with the wines. I'm tasting every barrel every month rather than just looking at a set of lab numbers and going, okay, barrels in the Eastern Bloc, we need to, maybe add this because the total acidity is off or whatever. I'm a winemaker based on my emotions versus laboratory data, which that's something I learned in France. There's really, in an essence, when you break it down, 2 styles of winemaking. There's emotional winemaking and there's lab-driven winemaking, where you're making decisions based on quantitative data or you're making decisions based on your senses. So I really feel more in touch with the emotional side of winemaking versus, the more technical side. But both are very important in winemaking.
Have you found sometimes when you're making wine that you have an idea of where you want it to be and the wine is like, nah, I think I'm going to do something different?
Yeah, always. You're always reacting in that way. Like that. And that's a big part of emotional winemaking where you're like, this often happens during élevage, so during aging. So we're in the barrel cellar and we're topping every month. And sometimes I have, I call them my problem child. So I'll have barrels where, and I'm really, my way of doing this is I mark with chalk on my barrels. So I have my own little coding system and I'll go through and I'll top, and maybe there's a barrel that I'm like, this tastes like it could be, developing volatile acidity, or it's a bit, leesy, or a Chardonnay barrel that's like, maybe this is unhappy on lees because the lees is starting to get a little bit more reductive. So you kind of put that on a watch list, or, you have to also learn, when to react and when not to react. So sometimes we're too quick to react. Something might seem like a bit more of a problem. Okay, let's fix it. What are we going to do? We got to move it out of the barrel. We got to do this. We got to do that. Sometimes you just have to step back and go, let's give it another couple of weeks. Unless there's like a really big problem, nothing is really going to drastically happen. And let's do this with intent. So if we're going to move it out of the barrel, we need to know why we're doing it, know what the problem is, and make sure there's an intention if we're going to take it from one place to another. So I don't know if that really answered your question.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Yeah. I suppose it's kind of like, even like with like having kids, they go through a phase and you're like,
yeah,
I'm not going to kill you today.
Yeah, exactly. Or like even at the beginning of, you can have like all these ideas at the beginning of harvest of where you want to go with a wine. And then sometimes, you have to pivot because like maybe, it's not the batch for wild ferment. There may be the natural yeast that are abundant in your cellar and the vineyard on your fruit. They aren't, strong enough to start quickly. And you don't want to take the risk of waiting and waiting and waiting, and then a bunch of other bacteria developing before you want spontaneous fermentation to start. So you decide to inoculate. So you have to really like, what is most important for me is not being dogmatic, like not being like, this is the way I do things and I only do it this way. For me, it's all about what's best for the wine in that year, in that moment. You just have to be prepared to make the decisions for the wine, not for like what your beliefs are in winemaking.
So when it comes to this winery, was there the decision to just do Pinot, Chardonnay, and Gamay? Was it because that's the grapes that are most suitable for this land?
Yeah. So Thomas Batchelder was a big part of the beginning of this winery.
I was just at his winery on Sunday.
Yeah. So he's
spectacular.
I know. Everybody who goes there always leaves like with such a positive like experience. And usually you are there for hours.
Yes, we were there for 2 hours.
Exactly. He's a very passionate person. And a real champion for the industry, in my opinion. And so he helped Susan and Joe kind of start the winery really with helping with basic building design and help guiding them with varieties that might work well. And like it is known in this region that Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and Gamay, those are 3 varieties that work really well here. I will say though, it was only Pinot and Chard when I first arrived. So the idea was kind of like the Burgundian approach. And why those varieties work well is because, they're early ripeners. So we don't always have the longest growing season. So they're kind of a safe bet on getting fully ripe and being able to pick, to make the best kind of quality wine possible. And they're typically wines that have a higher, or varieties that survive the winters a little better than other varieties. They're not as cold sensitive. They're still cold sensitive, but like not as like Chenin, for example, or Merlot, or Sauvignon Blanc.
What's the fussiest grape?
Well, the ones that aren't grown here would be and there's been a lot of people, a lot of growers over the last, since the industry, really evolved in the last like 30, 40 years, I guess, that have tried all sorts of varieties that just don't work well here. And like my father-in-law famously said to me, do you want a vineyard or do you want a vine hospital? Because you got to pick if you want a vineyard here, you have to pick the varieties that are going to be best suited for our climate. If you want to get experimental, that's great, but you have to accept that some varieties you're going to be, managing a vine hospital rather than a vineyard. So these cold sensitive varieties, include especially like Chenin, which is a variety you can find around here. And there are some growers, but you ask those growers, how often they're replanting, they'll probably say there's lots of replants every year. Even Sauv Blanc is quite winter sensitive. I should say Riesling is a great variety as well. The Riesling, Chardonnay are really 2 white varietals that do really well here. They grow well, they're winter hardy, and we can ripen them almost every season. And then Gamay, Pinot Noir, and Cabernet Franc. So I think, like in my opinion, those are those 5 varieties that work really well here. So.
Great. Well, let's get to some tasting.
Yeah. So I think first,
what are we going to start with, Morgan?
Yeah, I know we've got lots of yummy wines, and I've got some barrel samples of the most recent vintage, which is always so much fun.
This is our first podcast our episode where we're doing barrel samples, so I'm really excited about that.
Well, I guess it's unfair to say barrel samples. They're tank samples right now. They haven't been barreled down, and the rosé that I took out won't ever see a barrel. The white Pinot might, but anyway, we've got 2 Chardonnays, 2 Pinot, a Pinot Noir, and a Pinot Gamay. And then we've got 2 little special new vintage wines. So I think what we'll do is we'll dive into the finished wines in bottle first, and then we'll finish with the fun stuff.
That sounds great.
Okay. So we're going to start with the 2020 Rebel Chardonnay. Now, we make a few different kind of tiers to our lineup. Our first tier is we call our Rebel wines. So Rebel really means I like to describe them as wines made in the vineyard. They're wines focused on showcasing the primary fruit characters from the fruit in which they're coming from. So how I achieve that as a winemaker is really being very gracious in the approach of letting it develop in my cellar, but not overshadowing with winemaking techniques that might that might add to the flavor or interfere with the natural flavors. So this is a hand-picked fruit from our vineyard. This is the 2020 Rebel Chardonnay. 2020 gave us near perfect vintage conditions for optimal ripeness, but in really warm years, you have to be careful not to get it too ripe as well. So the picking was really important in 20, not to overshoot. So we wanted to pick when we still had nice structured acidity with ripeness, which we achieved and we're really excited about. So we handpicked, brought it in, sorted all took the fruit across the sorting table, sorted the imperfect stuff out, as well as letting the ladybugs drop to the table if there were ladybugs. We'll get into that after the wine.
Yeah. It's a really beautiful color. It's such a strong yellow.
Yeah. So this was so it comes into the winery. It's pressed, and then the juice is fermented in barrel. In this particular year, I only settled. So the juice goes into a tank first, and I put the tank on like -3 degrees, and I cold settle the juice. And what happens is the lees, the gross lees, we call it, settle to the bottom. So you imagine like home style orange juice with pulp, how the pulp settles to the bottom of the carton. Our lees, which is what we call our pulp, LEES, settles to the bottom of the tank. And then sometimes we'll with our like Civility, we leave it on heavy lees through ferment, but with the Rebel, we settle it out in a cold tank and then rack it into neutral oak barrels. Neutral oak meaning these barrels have seen at least 5 vintages. And at this point, we're no longer extracting oak tannin, oak flavor. We're just using this as a vessel for graceful micro-oxygenation through its aging and fermentation. So this color is kind of indicative of the cellaring. It was an oxidative environment through cellaring.
It's got a really beautiful nose. Kind of smells pineapple-y a little to me.
Yeah, so another reason for this is through the barrel aging, I'll leave it on its light lees for almost its entirety of aging. So what that does is lees also helps naturally protect the wine when it's healthy lees from oxidation, and also creates more of like the effect of creaminess on the mouthfeel and the palate. So I don't want this to be our biggest, boldest Chardonnay, but I want it to be expressing the fruit in which it came, like the vineyard and the fruit where it came from.
So and it's got a tropical kind of flavor to it as well. I smelled pineapple on it, and I kind of tasted a little bit of pineapple, and it's interesting because I don't get that from Chardonnays a lot. And as a caveat, I will say that, listener, you could come here and not taste the same thing because we all have completely different palates. So this is like my experience.
Yeah, and that's what I love about wine. It's funny, my dad always said to me, he's like, I'm certain I know the reason why you're in wine, because no one can ever tell you you're wrong. Because it is so personal, what you think, what you feel based on your own tastes. And that's what is special about wine. You know, something I might enjoy, someone else may, not enjoy as much at all. And there's so many different styles in which we can make, especially Chardonnay. So another interesting thing I find with our vineyard, doesn't matter the vintage condition, the way we pick it, how we ferment it, an underlying kind of character I always get in our Chardonnay is apricot.
Yes.
So that's just something I've kind of only really in the last few years recently kind of come to light with, because I've been also discovering what makes, 16 Mile Creek Shore Chardonnay, 16 Mile Creek Shore Chardonnay. And it's kind of been a discovery, every year kind of figuring that out. So I've been here since 2017. And I'm really just starting to now understand the rhythms of it all. And that also, the longer you are in a cellar at a winery working, with the vineyard manager, Bill Baranix, our vineyard manager, I try to work closely with him to better understand, what he sees when he's out there. And it takes a long time to really get the rhythms of a place and understand the behaviors in certain vintage conditions, and also how the wines react in your cellar. It takes a lot of trust, but it takes a lot of time to gain that trust too, and to start to understand that. So the Rebels have truly kind of been an evolution of how do we make this the most fruit-driven wine, but in a way, we don't want to make an unoaked Chardonnay. We still want something that's evolved and gracious and full of flavor and really kind of, making the best wine we can within the price range we want it to be. And we always want this wine to be like sub $28.
That's great.
Yeah. So this one, the 2020 Rebel, is $26.95. Like as you're looking at it now, like we've got this under screw cap. It's in a lightweight Burgundy bottle. And our labels are quite simple. We're not getting like crazy with embossing, or we're just really focused on the wine. Exactly. We don't want gimmicky stuff. We don't, it's just all about focusing on the wine and delivering value on that too.
I like that. And that's a really beautiful Chardonnay.
Thank you.
So now we're going to try another Chardonnay?
Yeah. So now we're going to move on to our Civility Chardonnay. So our Civility Chardonnay, we also make every year. And this is our reserve Chardonnay. This is the Chardonnay where it's the winemakers play, building on so the Rebel is taking as I said, the wine made in the vineyard, taking the fruit, the flavors from the fruit in the vineyard and giving them expression in the bottle. And our Civility is taking that as a baseline and then getting the winemaker involved and adding to it. It's a wine that we build. So what I mean by that is in most vintages and in this particular vintage, this is the 2018 Civility, and this was always made to be bottle aged and released at a later date. We didn't actually release this until this spring. So It's a newer release of an older vintage. And what I did was it was handpicked, wild barrel fermented on high solid. So we didn't settle the juice. We just took the fruit, pressed it, and the juice went straight into 500-liter French oak puncheons. So the Rebel's aged in neutral oak, French oak barriques. Barriques are 228 liters. The 18 Civility Chardonnay is French oak puncheons, which are 500-liter barrels. This was made from 4 French oak puncheons, 500 liters, so it's a 2,000-liter batch, so quite a small batch. And one of the barrels was brand new. So it's a 25% new oak Chardonnay. Again, that's kind of the first play into it, is the oak is a winemaker influence. I personally, with the Chardonnay, new oak, I like larger format barrels, these 500-liter formats, because they have, it's all about the surface area, right? So if you take a smaller barrel, there'll be more oak to wine. So you're going to get more of like a strong integration. Whereas when you have the larger surface area, more wine volume to oak, you're going to get a softer integration. And then I also like to use extra light, extra long toast on my oak. So essentially it's meaning the longest time, because what happens with oak barrels is they take a raw oak and they don't treat it with anything. They just put it under a flame and toast it. So you can determine, if you're doing a special order, how much toast you want and how long you want it toasted for. So on the other end of the spectrum, we got like a high char toast, like a whiskey barrel. And then what I like in my oak is a extra light, extra long. So the furthest away from the flame for the longest amount of time, essentially.
I keep picturing marshmallows in my head.
Yeah, right? But imagine like a giant oak barrel hanging, you know, above a giant open flame. That's like what you would be seeing. And one end of the barrel is open. So the extra long, extra light, it means it's just a gentle, soft integration of that toasted oak flavor into the wine, and also a little less oak tannin. So I don't want anything that's overpowering my wine. I want an oak that is integrated in helping build the wine, not taking over the flavor, because I'm very respectful of the flavor of the fruit. So the barrel influence is one influence of the Civility. And then I also, with the wild ferment as well, I mean, that inherently has its risks, but it also has its benefits, because the benefits are you often get more expression in a wild ferment because there's hundreds of yeasts naturally abundant, right? But there's only ever one that survives to the end through alcoholic fermentation, and that is the strong, the mighty Saccharomyces cerevisiae. And when you're inoculating with like a store-bought yeast, it's almost always that single strain, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, a single strain kind of taking over. But with wild ferment, the important part is in the first third of fermentation, when all of those yeast are active and working and consuming and creating byproducts, including, the good and the bad. A bad byproduct of wild fermentation or any fermentation would be acetic acid bacteria, so VA, or you could, in certain cases, diacetyl, which is like the really buttery kind of like almost sometimes rancid butter if there's too much. And then there's environments where you get Brettanomyces bacteria, which is a common wine taint. But a little bit of bread isn't always a bad thing, in my opinion. It's like the line, tightrope walking between fine and feral, a very dangerous tightrope. But anyway, my point is that with a wild ferment, you can get a lot of expression in the end result, as long as you're really focused on making sure, it finishes strong. So oftentimes what I'll do is, knowing that even if it's wild all the way to the end, there's only that one yeast that will be metabolizing that sugar into alcohol in those higher ethanol, higher alcoholic environments at the end. As the alcohol gets higher and higher towards the end, Saccharomyces cerevisiae is the only yeast strong enough to live and metabolize in those environments. So if it's starting to slow down, again, you make the decision as the winemaker, let's take lab yeast and inoculate now to make it finish strong. You're not doing a disservice to a wild ferment. So sometimes I'll have to make that call. I didn't in 2018. They were all very well behaved, surprisingly. Sometimes they're not very well behaved, so you have to make those calls. But so it finishes the wild ferment. And then what I do is then you've got your fermentation lees. That's at the bottom of the barrel. All of those dead yeast bacteria and, all the other solids that are cloudy during ferment, they settle out to the bottom. Your wine becomes clear, and then you get like I know it's not a very glamorous way of putting it, but it's like a big sludge at the bottom of your barrel. And in our Chardonnay from our vineyard, the healthy lees in the barrel, I'll take a sample from the bottom of the barrel and I'll taste it. And a healthy lees will almost be like a fuzzy peach. It's like super fruity, but like really tart, right? So I'll decide if it's healthy, if it tastes like that, I'll leave it in there on its lees. If it's unhealthy, it starts to be a little bit reductive, almost like, do I smell a bit of a hard-boiled egg in here? Like, is there some funny, gassy, reductive characters? Then I would decide to rack the wine off the lees after ferment and keep it clean. But in 2018, all the lees were really healthy. So I left all 4 of these puncheons on their gross lees. And then I do batonnage, which is, the French have a word for literally everything. And batonnage essentially means to aggressively whisk, not just whisk, but aggressively whisk. I'm not whisking the barrels, but I'm taking like this long stainless steel stick, getting it in the barrel, and I'm stirring the lees back up. So bringing those solids back into suspension. And again, I mentioned it's like a fuzzy peach. So we're kind of taking those flavors and that structural acidity and the texture of the lees and integrating it back into the wine, letting it settle out for a month, and then stirring it up again and letting it settle out. And in 2018, I did that for 6 months over the first year of aging in the cellar, first winter. And then I just let it sit and settle. And it just sat and it was just quiet for another 12 months. And then I bottled it. I blended the barrels together and off the lees. So at this point, it's like not sludgy and it's clear. And then I bottled it unfined and unfiltered. So it's fermented totally dry, no sugar. And it's also mallow dry, which means we take our malic back. It's a secondary bacterial ferment that takes malic acid, and then it has this bacterial ferment and turns it into a softer lactic acid. Malic acid is like biting into a green apple. Lactic acid is like having a yogurt. That's like the acidity kind of dichotomy there. But so it's a soft in acidity, but big on structural acidity because of the lees integration. It's got really nice weight because of the barrel aging. And then also because of the lees stirring, we've got a really nice creamy texture on the finish.
I'm almost drooling getting ready to taste.
So enough talking. Morgan, be quiet and let them just taste the wine.
What a beautiful, again, another beautiful color.
Yeah, it's like a golden, it's like a golden honey I don't know. Is that like a psalm right now is probably listening and being like, oh my God, what did she just say?
It is kind of like a golden honey though, and a completely different nose than the other one. It's much softer, a little citrusy, but
Yeah, you get kind of that subtle oak in there, very light, kind of vanilla toast for me.
I was just gonna say a little bit of vanilla.
And I kind of like this like butterscotchy, I don't know, almost like a candy apple, like, you know, the caramel candy apple.
Oh yeah.
It's kind of the vibe I'm getting right now.
When you were talking about the fermentation and I just kept picturing like the yeast being like having an uprising and fighting to try to overturn the lead yeast and
Totally.
be like, no, we didn't. Oh well, he wins.
Honestly, I start to wonder if it's just like a battleground in there. Just like,
Every sip, this gets better and better. It's just a really, really beautiful wine. It's very light.
Yeah, it shouldn't be. One thing we don't want is to have something too blousy and too rich. I think that lightness really comes from making sure the structured acidity is kind of leading the finish. So like the backbone of the wine is really based on the perception of acidity on the palate, because we want all of these creamy, textural kind of these flavors and this mouthfeel, but we don't want it to fall short and taste flat, right? We still want it to feel bright and refreshing, but still rich and textured. So it can be, you can have all these ideas of how you can achieve that, but sometimes it's like, okay, how do we really achieve that? These are great ideas, but like, is this going to work? So it's nice when you put your trust in a wine where, this is 2018, we bottled this in 2020, and we didn't release it to 2024. So it takes a lot of patience, and I said when I was at I4C, the International Cool Climate Chardonnay Celebration, I said that right? Celebration. This past spring, when we released this, I was on a panel and I said, and I still obviously believe this true about this wine, everything in winemaking seems to take so much time and patience. So sometimes I feel like we're waiting for the vineyard to be established. We're waiting a whole growing season to pick, fermenting almost over a whole winter sometimes, and then aging in the cellar for another year. It would almost do a disservice to then rush the wine to market. Right. So this is kind of a test to making a wine that's meant to then be bottle aged and, then be released at a later date. So it's all about practicing patience and giving the wine, like letting the wine make the decision on when it's ready. And we knew it was ready this spring. I taste them all the time, the ones we haven't released, just to kind of keep an eye on the ones, that are upcoming and bottle aging. And I think I was also just ready to release it. I was like, okay, I'm just like too excited about this. But we knew it was time. It had come together fully in the bottle.
It's just really, it's a beautiful finish and it's just really nice and really welcoming as a wine, I find.
So while I'm opening the reds, I want to quickly talk about, I don't know if you've talked about it with anyone else in the podcast before, but the ladybug taint issue in this industry.
No, I don't think we have covered that.
So there's the red ladybugs, which are the friendly ones. We don't mind those. You don't see a lot of them though, right? You only see the ladybugs that are orange or kind of yellowy looking.
The aggressive ones?
Yes. So those are called multicolored Asian lady beetles. And I always say, most people remember early 2000s, the Jays game that was canceled because of the aphids. The response to the aphids were bringing in these multicolored Asian lady beetles to get rid of the aphid problem, which was great. That helped. But, the repercussions on our wine industry were really felt. They didn't know at the time what there was going to be such a big problem. Well, what happens when these ladybugs get into a batch of wine, like into a press and pressed through the juice and then put into the cellar, they create ladybug taint. So it's this nasty smell and taste in the wine that you can't get rid of. And as little as like a dozen ladybugs in a one press load can completely taint an entire batch of wine. And it's almost like rancid peanut butter.
Ew.
But if you crush one of those Asian lady beetles in your finger, you'll notice they're like extremely pungent in smell. And I believe it's a methoxyl pyrazine, which is the same kind of as like a really green pepper, kind of like a when a Cab Franc is really underripe, it has those same chemical compounds. I really hope I'm getting that right, but that's what I believe it is. But anyway, they're a big problem. And so you can do a couple things. You either spray for them, which the spray on the market for them, it's a pretty intense insecticide that's like kills really anything, not just ladybugs. Or what most, I don't want to say boutique winemakers, but a lot of kind of terroir-driven, small batch focused wineries, they will hand sort the fruit. So you hand pick your fruit and then you dump it on a vibrating sorting table before it goes into its vessel or the press or wherever. And essentially the ladybugs, where they like to hide are in the stems. And especially late ripening varieties, they get ladybugs because the ladybugs love to be in the soy fields. And as soon as they harvest the soy, they need to find somewhere else to live and they'll come into the grapes. Luckily with Pinot and Chard, we have our varieties off usually before the soy. So it's like, yay, this is great. There's no bugs. But then if you decide to push something a little later ripening and the soy comes off, it's like, great, I know what's about to happen. And then there's hundreds in the air and they're everywhere. Like last weekend, it was like, they were everywhere. But, they fall to the bottom of the sorting table and then, then your fruit's free of them. But it's, the industry really had to pivot, did not expect this happening. And then millions of liters of wine were dumped down the drain. I believe it was 2001.
Wow.
And so this is just something we do now. So we hand sort all of our fruit just to be sure. And also hand sorting gives you an opportunity to inspect all the fruit before it goes into the press. So get rid of anything that the pickers may have missed, botrytis or sour rot.
The mold.
Exactly. Botrytis, mold, sour rot is just essentially when the fruit starts to rot and it gets like a vinegar smell. So now we're going to move on to some reds.
Pinot Noir.
Yeah. So this one, this is the Rebel Pinot Noir from 2018. It's actually Pinot Noir Gamay. And this is a fun little thing because in 2018 was my first full vintage year. So I inherited the 17s, I like to say. They were a cross between the old winemaker Reagan and myself. So she processed the wine, got it into cellar, and then I came in and I finished the wine through cellaring. But 2018 was really my first full year here, my first full vintage. And one of the first things I wanted to do was play around with some Gamay. At the time, there's only Pinot Noir and Chardonnay planted here. Gamay has always been a very special variety to me. It was the first red wine I ever kind of got drawn to, and I believe it's the variety that created my wine obsession. Good old Louis Jadot Beaujolais Village. Don't knock it till you try it.
I have tried it.
I know, right? Everybody's tried it. But it's a really good soft red to get people onto wine, especially those who don't think they like red wine.
I always call Gamay the gateway.
Totally, it's a gateway
to red.
Gateway. Yeah,
whenever
the gateway to Pinot is how I think of it.
But whenever when I have people, they're like, "Oh no, I only like white." I'm like, "Well, try some reds, but start with a Gamay."
Yeah,
because it's not those punch you in the face reds.
No, it's soft and it's got a lot of really bright red fruit characters and it's yummy and I love Gamay. So I said, listen, let's purchase a ton of fruit. We purchased from a guy, really close to us on the escarpment. And at the time, I wasn't sure if I was just going to do a Gamay or I was going to do a Gamay Pinot blend. So when I lived in France, I worked in Alsace, but I spent a lot of weekends in Beaujolais. And I loved on the border of Beaujolais and Burgundy, they would make this style of red all the time where they would passe du grain, where they blend Gamay and Pinot. And it's more of a fun winemaker's wine. And I thought, you know what? I think this is where this is going to go. And then I can talk to the owners about how great this is, and then maybe they'll plant some because there was still more room to plant on the property at the time. And now you're looking directly at our little 1 acre Gamay. So the plan worked, muhaha. Actually, this is the first year we will make our full 100% red Gamay.
Wow.
So we've made rosé from it the last couple of years. And we did a bit of rosé with it this year. We'll try some. But so this was a fun little experiment where I took, in 2018, 75% of this blend is 100% whole cluster Pinot Noir, wild fermented. And then the other 25% is Gamay, berries taken off the stems and fermented whole berry, almost kind of mimicking carbonic maceration. So I sealed the tank up and filled it full of CO2. But I don't have the proper carbonic maceration tanks to have it under pressure. So I was just kind of mimicking it. And what happens when you do that, you don't touch the tank for 10 to 14 days. And you allow the fermentation to start happening. We call it intercellular fermentation. So it happens within the berry. So when you open the tank after 10 days, it's like this really puffy cap where all of the berries are still fully intact, but they literally look like they're about to explode. And you touch.
Like when you make cranberry sauce.
Exactly. And then you touch one, it's like, and then you put it in your mouth and it's like an explosion. Like it's fermenting within the berry, but the skin is still holding on for dear life, not splitting. And then you start working the cap, breaking it up and then getting it through ferment. But what that does, that carbonic maceration, it kind of creates this candied, I always describe it as a Jolly Rancher. It's really sweet and candied. And then we've got the Pinot in here that's really structured in tannin with the whole cluster. And it was all aged in neutral oak barrel for 14 months and then bottled, unfined, and unfiltered. So filtering takes away color and flavor, especially from reds. So I almost only exclusively bottle my reds unfiltered because I really want to get the most out of it. And yeah.
It's a really nice color.
And this is a wine that I drink year round, but it's a really good summer wine because you can serve it slightly chilled and it's super yummy.
Got almost a cranberry nose on it.
Mm-hmm. So typical of Pinot too. So as with the next wine we'll taste, you'll start to really understand about structured tannin. So when you're fermenting a Pinot with whole cluster ferments or doing whole cluster, you're getting 3 layers of tannin. You're getting the tannin from the skins, the tannin from the stems, and the tannin from the seeds. So it will often be a lot more structured in terms of the feeling of tannin in the mouth.
Because you can feel that tingliness of the tannins.
Versus if you take the berries off the stems, you're just getting the skin and the seed tannin. So the stem kind of offers a different
I can see how that would be nice chilled.
Yeah.
I think it would
slightly chilled is really nice.
Yeah. That's the first time I've ever tasted a Pinot Gamay blend.
So the next one we're going to have, the last finished bottle we're going to have or share is the 2018 Civility Pinot, which, like our Civility Chardonnay, the Civility Pinot is our reserve wine, our reserve Pinot. And this is typically a showcase of really our 4 to 5 best barrels in the cellar of that vintage. It's also typically a bit more kind of less about just when it comes to blending, just picking out the top barrels. It's a little bit more, there's a bit more strategy that goes into it from the very beginning. I tend to like to make this wine really deliver on tannin and weight on the mid palate. So I want it to be a bigger, bolder Pinot. And I achieved that by almost kind of in most years. Again, I'm not dogmatic, but I like to do 100% whole cluster only with this when I can, because I want that dimension of skin, seed, and stem tannin. And how I know it's a good year for 100% whole cluster, and I learned this in France, is you go in, again, emotional winemaking, you go in and when you're ready to harvest, you take the grapes, the whole cluster of it, and you bite it and chew it like an apple.
Oh.
And leave the stem and all. And if it feels like you have a banana peel in your mouth, then the stems aren't ripe. If it feels like there's a bunch of woodiness in your mouth and you still feel it, it's tannic, but it doesn't feel like you've just chewed on a banana peel and it's super astringent. If it doesn't feel like that, then the clusters, the stems, they're suitable to be 100% whole cluster. You can also tell when you cut the cluster if the stem is lignified. So lignified meaning like it'll turn brown and woody versus still be very bright green. This was an interesting year in 2023 or 2024, sorry, God, here we are, 2024, today.
We started this podcast.
Yeah, right. In 2024, and I was, Yvonne, she's at Creekside, and she also has her own label. We were saying how it was an odd year where everything was like really ripe, but the stems this year were not lignified. Like across all varieties, the stems stayed very green before they started to go woody. So this year I didn't do anything 100%. The closest ferment I did to 100% whole cluster was only a 70% whole cluster. So I don't want to make it green or astringent and bitter. I want everything to be integrated. And in 2018, it was a great year for that. Same with 2020 to do 100% whole cluster. And so unlike white, where we press it and just ferment the juice, red, we ferment on skins, on stems, and it stays there on its skins and stems for a month before we then press it when it's finished alcoholic fermentation. So you want to make sure if you're going to really leave, it's like a tea bag, right? It's got to be a really, really high quality tea if you're going to let it soak and steep for that long without tasting, astringent and bitter. So it's got to have, a lot of other weight to go with that tannin. And in 18, we had a really good skin to, it's very windy out there, a really good skin to flesh ratio where the skins were real tough and thick and there wasn't too much flesh on the inside. So we had a lot of color density and flavor.
Yeah, the color is really deep. It's such a dark burgundy.
And I decided in this year, in 18, that I only wanted this whole cluster ferment to be aged in neutral oak. So a winemaking decision where I didn't want the influence of oak overshadowing kind of the purity of what was happening with this wine.
This one doesn't have that cranberry smell.
No, it's much different.
Really much different. More berry forward.
And same vintage, just 100% Pinot.
Wow. That's beautiful.
That's the best thing about wine is like it can just be good.
I can't even describe it. Yeah, it's just like,
I feel like there's like this mystique that, and I love Soms because they're at the front lines and promoting a lot of the wines, and they're the ones like on the battlegrounds, like convincing consumers to try Ontario and but sometimes I feel like a consumer doesn't really care what you think it tastes like. They just care if they like it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you can just decide that, and a wine can just simply be, this tastes soft and full of flavor, and I really like it. And that is a suitable enough descriptor.
Well, it's, sometimes Pinots can be a bit thin, but that's nice and full-bodied for a Pinot. And it's just got so much flavor to it that I'm like, that's the kind of Pinot that I would drink, not just with the meal, but just sit and drink that Pinot. Yeah. And that says a lot because most of the time I drink Pinots with food. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But that really has like a really great full-bodied, like fruit. I can still taste the fruit in my mouth after not having a sip of the wine. Yeah. So well done, Morgan.
Thank you. Yeah. So aged in neutral French oak for 15 months and then bottled, unfined, and unfiltered. So not much. They're just, just grapes.
Yeah. What's your price point on that one?
This one is $34.95.
That's incredible for a wine for a Pinot that's that superb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we really try, like Susan and Joe, a big part of their philosophy here is to really, have wines of this kind of caliber available at friendly prices and not seem like, too wines like this shouldn't feel out of reach. Right. And so that's what we're kind of trying to achieve.
And it goes back to what we were saying at the beginning about that wines don't have to be super expensive in order to be great. It's like that. And some wineries, that would be an $80 bottle.
Yeah.
But I love
sometimes I wish we did sell it for $80 just so I can be like, we make an $80 bottle of wine. But I'll leave that to other people to, it's another funny thing we talk about in this industry. It's like a really important thing to understand is also, for us, these small wineries, we need the commercial wineries to survive, and they need us. The tide, we all rise with the tide together. Mm-hmm. And So if there are other wineries in this region that can sell an $80 bottle of Pinot, I think that only benefits all of us, because then it's like, you know what? Then it's putting value on wine from this region, that it's worthy of that price point. So, but we're still like we're not trying to make these unattainably priced, Pinots yet, I guess. But
there is some there. Like, I remember being at a dinner a few years ago, and we were at a dinner in Niagara Falls, and they were serving an Italian wine, and I was going, I wish they were serving Ontario wines.
Yeah.
Because we're here at this dinner, and we should be celebrating our region.
Yeah.
And I didn't think the Italian wines were that great compared to the wines I've had here. And I know there are great Italian wines, but in that particular dinner, I don't think they did a pairing properly.
Yeah, I did a service to them. Yeah.
Yeah, and the people sitting at the table with us were like, "Well, Ontario wines are so expensive." I'm like, "But you're buying local, and you need to understand the work that goes into it." And I think that's what I love about this podcast is like just hearing you talk about handpicking and all of the process that you go through, your labor of love with this. Mm-hmm. It's like you're basically selling your babies.
Yeah.
And that's what's great about it. It's like
it's true.
It's not like just going to like a big factory and buying wine that they make like millions of bottles. So it's like this is a labor of love.
Yeah.
And you're drinking someone's craft. Mm-hmm. And I think it's fantastic.
Thank you.
And you're doing a really great job with it.
Thank you.
I wish you guys were open more than one day a week.
I know, yeah. Only Saturdays, 11 to 4. But it's because we're such a small team, right? But we do this time of year, it's not available, but like outside of vintage, I do offer, and you can book through our website. I do offer winemakers tastings on Thursdays and Fridays as well. So it like gives people an opportunity who especially people in the industry too, who want to pop in here during the week.
Because they're all working on Saturdays.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, or just, people coming to wine country, not on the weekend. But yeah.
But it's worth the trip on a weekend. From 11 to 4 on a Saturday, listener, it's really worth it. I've done the tasting several times.
We do walk-ins now. Like before we were by appointment only, but now we're encourage walk-ins as well. But appointments are always better because then you're guaranteeing your tasting spot. Mm-hmm. But because we're a small tasting room, and in the winter, in the spring and summer, we've got tables outside, but in the winter, we're just limited to this table of 6 here. So it's really private, intimate, kind of like exactly like what we're doing right now, where you're sitting down with us, just like chatting about the wines. And my goal is to make it, I always say this, my husband's in beer. And I'm like, I want wine to be like cool like beer. I want people to not feel intimidated.
I want that too.
I want them to come in and when you go somewhere and you do a flight of beer, like a beer tasting, it's like, you don't feel like, oh, am I going to say the right thing? Or, what?
Am I not going to smell something?
Yeah,
am I going to,
who cares
am
about
I going to feel bad if I don't like this one?
No, I just want people to come in. I don't talk really much about, I don't use many descriptors of the traditional tasting experience where you're going to notice this on the palate and that, and this is what you're going to taste. And, pick your 4 wines you want to taste and I'll tell you what you're tasting. It's more like, come in, try the wines that we have available, that we have open today. Let me tell you about how we made them, and you be the judge if you like them or not.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I try to do, and demystify it and make people feel more comfortable about just coming in and hanging out and trying some wine.
Yeah. And it's like, I've done wine tasting with people where I left the winery and go, and I loved all those wines. And the person I was with was like, I hated all of them. And I'm like, that's really interesting because it's because we all have very distinct palates. So now we're doing something really exciting and new and trying a wine from the cask.
Yeah. So this is the first time we've done a wine like this, and a fun little experiment this year. This is a white Pinot Noir.
I'm taking a picture of it and I'm going to put it on the website. On our Instagram account so that people can actually see. It looks like we're drinking a juice.
Yeah, so this is freshly fermented.
It looks like a pear juice.
Yeah, it's still, very cloudy, has, a very high in solids, high turbidity. It's a freshly fermented wine, hasn't settled out yet. What you can expect from this wine when we bottle it, it will be clear because it will settle over the night. We're going to bottle it this spring, so it won't age in our cellar like most of our other wines. It'll be bottled with our rosé. And it's supposed to be a fun wine, kind of celebrating the diversity of Pinot. Very small batch. There's only 600 liters of it,
$400 a bottle.
Yeah. No, we're going to put it in a screw. We'll probably put it under screw cap like our Rebel. Try to keep it in like the same, like under $30 with the packaging. And also just the way it was made, it's not going to see oak. It's not going to see that much time in our cellar. So like, we're not going to sell it for, over $30.
It's my very first time trying a white Pinot.
Yeah.
So
the idea is to keep this in a tank, keep it aromatic. Right now, to me, it is very pithy, grapefruity, like kind of tropical, but not really. Like
I
almost
smell
like
pear.
I was just, exactly.
Just because I said it looks like pear juice, and now I'm like prejudiced with pear. I feel so privileged that I get to taste it before.
So it's always so interesting too, because wine has there's so much that evolves in it before it gets to the bottle. So like you're trying like a really raw product. Right now, that acidity, it's like so obvious, right? But that softens. We lose a gram or two of total acidity as the wine ages. And
that's going to be a great wine.
It's supposed to be something just like fun and celebrating, like I said, the diversity of Pinot. And, in France, in Champagne, those three main varieties of Champagne grapes, Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier, Chardonnay. Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier, those are red varieties. But, you don't see sparkling red really come out of Champagne. They're taking a red grape and making it like a white wine. So taking the fruit, pressing it, and fermenting only the juice. All the color comes from the skins, right? Yeah. So almost every grape in the world, I believe maybe there's only one wine grape where you cut it in half and look, the flesh is clear and the skin is colored, right? For reds. So you need to ferment a red wine on skins to extract the color and flavor. But if you press it right away, you're only going to be getting the color of the flesh, right? But with Champagne, it's almost always like white right off the bat, white juice, because you're picking the grapes slightly underripe in sparkling. Where with this variety or this particular Pinot, we allowed it to get totally ripe, like as if we were going to harvest for red wine, and then picked it and pressed it. And when it came out of the press, it was like, oh crap, this is a rosé. Oh crap, we already started fermenting our rosé. I can't add more volume to this. What the hell? So it was like a total experiment. But what we did is we cold settled it. We added a couple juice fining products. So they're like gelatin essentially, and it helps settle the juice and kind of take some color away as well. And it basically absorbs the color into the lees, and then we rack it off the lees. We don't ferment it on its lees. And this is not wild fermented. We picked a specific yeast strain that was going to help just promote like an aromatic ferment.
It is very aromatic already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then finished it dry, fully dry. We stopped mallow, so we didn't want it to get full. We didn't want full malolactic fermentation happening. We still wanted some of that crunchy acidity, not too soft. And yeah, this is just a total experiment.
It's so fun.
Yeah.
So this is sort of after the lees, you're saying? This is...
Yeah, so this now, like what's in suspension and cloudy is like the lees post-primary ferment. So it's already been racked off its heavy lees and its fermentation lees. So all of those dead yeast cells that fall to the bottom of the tank. And now it was racked yesterday. So it's cloudy still because there's a whole bunch of proteins in suspension essentially. And what will happen is over the next few months, those will settle out and the wine will become more clear. And we'll probably add bentonite clay to this, which bentonite clay, it's essentially what it does is it helps settle out proteins and make the wine a bit more clear. And then we'll filter it and to make it even more clear and then bottle it. So
I feel like we have to come back once it's bottled and do the follow-up episode with because this is really cool. Like this is a really great experience.
So I'm glad you enjoyed that.
I did, and I can't wait to taste that when it's fully bottled because I can really taste the potential in that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm hoping, the hope is we'll keep those aromatics. So the idea is we're not going to put it into barrel. We don't want it to mature, and we don't want to work with oxygen. We want it to be antioxidative or anaerobic rather than aerobic. And then hopefully in the tank, keep it cold, and then promoting the colder temperatures, kind of promoting the kind of locking in those aromatics, and then bottling it and releasing it next spring as well.
I'm like excited to try it when it's bottled, and then like serve it to people and go like, "This is a Pinot."
Yeah,
and they're
exactly.
going like, "Are you nuts?"
Because it's kind of got like a Pinot Gris / Riesling vibe to it. Like,
Yeah,
really,
a little bit, yeah.
That's what I was saying to Eamon, who works with me. I'm like, it kind of like, I would have no idea in a blind tasting right now, especially what the hell this is.
Yeah.
Which that's like the excitement, for
Yeah,
me.
I love that. Yeah, yeah.
So our last fun wine is our latest, greatest rosé. So her rosé sells out very quickly. And so our general response would be to make more, but we're very, again, we're not like buying fruit, so we're limited to what we have. So we used to just do a Pinot rosé. And then I said, okay, to make our volume a little bit bigger, like not much, like this will be like probably when it's finished, only 1,500 liters, which is still like a puddle to most wineries, but better than 800 liters. And anyway, it's a fields blend. So it is a blend of all the varieties we grow on our property, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Gamay. We harvested them all on the same day and pressed them that day as well. Let the Gamay soak on its skins for about 6 hours before pressing it, so extracting a little bit of color, and then pressing that, and then we press the Chardonnay, and then same with the Pinot Noir. We let it sit on skins for, about the same time, about 6 hours. It was picked like an hour later, so it was more like 5 hours maybe, if I'm getting really specific. But all pressed, put into tank, and co-fermented together. So 3 different varieties of juice in one tank. So it's supposed to represent the field blend from our property. And, right now, what would you describe this color? Like
Coral pink.
Yeah, coral pink. And I think what it might look like in the end is like a pink starburst.
Oh, okay. Because right now it's very light.
Yeah,
it's like a pastel kind of coral
Yeah,
pink.
and I think it'll get even lighter. Because
it looks like a bridesmaid's dress.
That's so funny. So what will happen, again, this is done from ferment, and it's been racked off its gross leaves. But what will happen is it will settle out, and some of this color will then be pulled down into its leaves over the next few months. And then we'll filter this before we bottle it.
It does look like juice again.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like grapefruit juice. It doesn't smell like grapefruit juice. It smells really fruity.
Yeah.
Like Jolly Ranchery fruity. Totally. Yeah.
We were getting during ferment, Eamon and I were talking about, what does that smell? What does that smell? And we're like, do you remember Fruitopia?
Yes.
During ferment, it smelled like the strawberry kiwi Fruitopia.
Yes.
It was so crazy. We're like, that's exactly what it smells like.
It's funny that it smells like it, but it's tart. It's a little tart on the taste.
I felt like I was in the high school cafeteria having like a chicken wrap with a Fruitopia. When those, that's the craziest thing about your sense of smell.
Right.
It has a big tie with memory. Mm-hmm. So it can just take you back somewhere in an instant. It's insane. But when we labeled it as the Fruitopia, I was all of a sudden in my high school cafeteria.
You're like, I need to have a tray next to me.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to be a really great rosé because I can already taste it now.
It's got a really nice, softer mouthfeel.
I feel like a pioneer of wine.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think what I love too is when people in the last month have been coming in for tastings. I've worked a couple Saturdays in the last month, and I'll pull them samples from the barrel, so they can taste the Chardonnay that's fermenting, so they can taste juice before it starts fermenting, and it gives you an idea really of really how much changes. And a lot of people are really surprised when they try juice how sweet it is. It's incredibly sweet when we pick it, and all of that sweetness. The yeast, again, they have that crazy rave in the barrel or the tank, raving it up, metabolizing all of those sugars into alcohol.
With the strobe lights. Bum,
yeah,
bum,
exactly.
Bum, bum, bum.
There's been a few vintages where I've had wines that Chardonnay barrel ferments that were having they were getting sluggish, being really slow at the end. And I did the age-old trick, they call them some people would refer to them as these wacky winemakers. But I would blast classical music when I left. I would put classical music on the radio in the cellar, really, really loud. And the vibration of the sound of the music helps the lees move.
That's really cool.
I mean, that's the theory. There'd probably be a lot of people that are like, more science motivated or, driven by quantitative data.
Just,
Be
but
like,
you're an
"That's bullshit."
emotional winemaker.
Yeah, but
so.
I'm like, why not try that? I
Yeah.
mean, what's the harm?
Exactly. That's so great. This is going to be an absolutely incredible rosé.
Thank you.
I feel like I need to order it now because I know how quickly you sell out.
Yeah. There are so many barriers in like having a wine business in Ontario. We are our wine region is the highest taxed wine region anywhere in the world. And also, like you said, doing a disservice, not being able to sell across the province. Like, we're limited to where we can sell and how we can sell. And I think it's total horseshit, honestly.
I agree. I think that Ontario wines are fantastic. I think that that's why I'm doing this podcast, because I want the world to know how amazing this area is. And since I've been coming out here, I've been coming out here since the 90s, and it's changed and evolved and become so much more exquisite. There's so many more small lot wineries like yourself that are doing fantastic productions. And I just think that the world needs to know about it. And we're doing ourselves a disservice by saying, no, it can only be in Ontario. Yeah. We need to be able to put products everywhere and be able to ship to Quebec and to be able to ship to across Canada and to the States. It's like, I think that will then grow the industry, which then grows the economy.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So, hey, politicians, listen in.
I know. And also, another thing that gets talked about quite often, at our annual Ontario Craft Winery Conference, is the fact that the government won't invest more in infrastructure to make it easier for people to get here. One of the best things about being in Niagara is the fact that we have a reach of millions and millions of people within our grasp.
Exactly.
But where the hell is the daily multiple service train that's coming into this region? Where it's not, there's maybe two, on the weekend, maybe 2 trains that come in, they go to Niagara Falls.
But there are hundreds of buses that go to casinos on a daily basis.
Exactly.
And they should have that available.
Just transport to wine country, make it easier.
Yes, because you can come out here on a train and then order, buy the wine, but have it shipped to your house. Mm-hmm. Not a big deal. I mean, I completely agree. I think that we really need to open up more transportation, because who wants to sit in traffic forever?
Well, and that's the other thing. In the height of the seasons, in the summer, I have customers that book from Toronto that'll book an appointment here, and they call, listen, I'm really sorry, we're running 45 minutes late because it's taking us 3 hours.
Yes.
That's insane.
I had friends that did that when the liquor strike was out. They came to visit me. They left Toronto at 10:30 and got to my house at 2:00.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And that's ridiculous.
And I don't necessarily think the answer is widening the roads and making that. I think the answer is making it more accessible for high-speed trains, public transport.
How about a ferry?
Yeah, well, that would be a start, honestly.
Yeah. You could do a ferry that goes from Toronto to St. Catharines.
Yeah, to Jordan Harbor.
Exactly. Go to Jordan Harbor and get off there, and then you can get on a wine tour bus.
Yeah.
And it would be fantastic. I think we've got
lots of ideas.
We have solved women, because women make the difference, my friend. Well, Jordan, you know what? I mean, Morgan. I'm like Jordan because we're Jordan area, right? And we're talking about Jordan. It's Morgan, this has been so great. I love tasting from the cask. I love all the stuff that we've been, not the vat, rather, not the cask. Yeah. I love your take on winemaking. And I love 16 Mile Cellars.
Thank you.
I'm so happy that we did this. It's been such a great experience. And you, the listener, I hope that you have really enjoyed this visit to 16 Mile Cellar. And I hope that you will like and follow Spill the Wine on all of our platforms, because we are available in so many different areas now. You really have to listen to us. And if you have any suggestions or any topics that you want to suggest, then you know what? Check out our Instagram page. It's spillthewine_podcast. That's on Instagram. And then you can send us a note. You can see pictures of the wine that we have sampled here, particularly the wine in the glass that was from the cask.
Yeah.
It's going to be so much fun. And we can't wait for you to tune into our next episode. And again, thank you so much, Morgan. This was great.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming out. I really appreciate it.
We would just like to end with
cheers.